It was our first Christmas with my new boyfriend, and it was perfect. But then my daughter opened her big gift from him and went completely pale. She stared into the box, silent and terrified. 5 minutes later, I was on the phone with 911, and our perfect Christmas was over. I never thought I would date again after my divorce 3 years ago. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too raw. My ex-husband left us for someone younger, leaving me to pick up the pieces while raising our daughter alone. For those 3 years, it was just Lily and me against the world. I poured everything I had into being both mother and father to her. I worked 2 jobs, made sure she had everything she needed, and tried my best to fill the void her father left behind. Dating was the furthest thing from my mind. My daughter was my entire world, and I was terrified of bringing anyone into our carefully constructed life who might hurt her. Lily had been through enough. She didn't need another person to disappoint her. But 6 months ago, everything changed when I met Mark at a coffee shop downtown. I was exhausted from a double shift, grabbing a quick latte before picking Lily up from her after-school science club. I accidentally bumped into him while reaching for my drink, spilling half his cappuccino down his shirt. I was mortified, apologizing profusely while grabbing napkins. He just laughed, that easy, charming laugh that I would come to know so well. He told me it was fine, that the shirt was old anyway. We started talking, and before I knew it, 30 minutes had passed. He was a freelance photographer who traveled the world for various publications and private clients. He showed me pictures on his phone of incredible landscapes, exotic animals, and vibrant cultures. His work was stunning. There was something about his presence that put me at ease. He was confident without being arrogant, interesting without being pretentious. When he asked for my number, I hesitated for only a moment before giving it to him. Our first date was simple. Dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant where we talked for hours. He asked about my life, my daughter, my dreams. He listened in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When I told him I was a single mother, he didn't flinch or make excuses to leave early. Instead, he leaned in and asked more questions about Lily. What was she like? What were her interests? I told him about her unique passion, and his eyes lit up with genuine interest. That was the moment I started to fall for him. Lily was 10 years old and unlike any other kid I had ever known. While other children her age were obsessed with dolls, video games, or sports, my daughter was captivated by insects and arachnids. It started when she was 5, finding a caterpillar in our backyard and insisting we raise it until it became a butterfly. From there, her fascination grew into a full-blown passion. Her room was a shrine to the arthropod world. The walls were covered with detailed posters showing the life cycles of various insects, anatomical diagrams of spiders, and charts identifying hundreds of species. Her bookshelf overflowed with field guides, scientific journals written for young readers, and college-level entomology textbooks she had begged me to buy. She had several display cases containing ethically sourced specimens, each carefully labeled with scientific names, common names, and geographic origins. She could identify a spider by its web pattern alone. She knew the difference between true bugs and other insects. She understood concepts like metamorphosis, social structures in colonies, and predator-prey relationships better than most adults. At school, the other kids thought she was weird. I knew it hurt her, even though she tried to hide it from me. She ate lunch alone most days, reading her insect books while other children played. Parent-teacher conferences were always the same. Her teachers praised her intelligence and focus, but expressed concern about her social development. They suggested I encourage more typical interests, more normal hobbies. I always smiled politely and ignored their advice. Lily was brilliant, passionate, and unapologetically herself. I would never try to change that. If other people couldn't appreciate her unique mind, That was their loss, not hers. When I introduced Mark to Lily after a month of dating, I was terrified. I had prepared her in advance, explained that this was someone special to me, and promised that nothing would change between us. I watched nervously as they met for the first time at our apartment. Mark brought his camera and showed Lily some of his macro photography from a trip to Costa Rica. He had incredible close-up shots of beetles, mantises, and a stunning golden orb weaver spider in its web. Lily's eyes went wide. She started asking him technical questions about his equipment, his shooting techniques, how he approached the subjects without disturbing them. Mark answered every question with patience and enthusiasm. He didn't talk down to her or dismiss her knowledge. He treated her like a colleague, like someone whose opinion mattered. By the end of that first meeting, Lily was smiling more than I had seen in months. That night, after Mark left, she hugged me tight and whispered that she liked him. I cried happy tears after she went to bed. Over the next few months, Mark became a regular part of our lives. He integrated himself seamlessly into our little family. He came to Lily's science fair and spent an hour examining her project on ant colony behavior, asking thoughtful questions that made her beam with pride. He joined us for movie nights, always letting Lily pick the film even when it was a nature documentary instead of the latest animated feature. He cooked us dinner, taught me photography basics, and never once made me feel pressured or rushed. With Lily, he was especially wonderful. He brought her books from his travels, rare field guides that weren't available in regular stores. He showed her photographs of insects and spiders he encountered in remote locations. Once, he brought her a perfectly preserved cicada shell from Japan, mounted in a small display case. She treasured it like gold. The moment that really sealed it for me was when Mark bought Lily a professional-grade microscope for her birthday in October. It wasn't a toy or a cheap beginner model. It was a real, high-quality instrument that cost several $100s. Lily cried when she opened it. She immediately started examining slides, looking at insect parts and spider hairs, with a level of detail she had never been able to see before. Mark sat with her for hours that day, looking through the microscope with her, sharing in her wonder and excitement. I watched them together and felt something I hadn't felt since before my divorce. Hope. Hope that maybe we could be a real family again. Hope that Lily could have a father figure who actually cared about her. Hope that I could have a partner who loved both of us. Mark was careful never to overstep. He never tried to discipline Lily or make parenting decisions. He deferred to me on everything important, while still being present and supportive. He asked before planning activities with us, respected our existing routines, and never made me feel guilty when I needed alone time with my daughter. He understood that Lily came first, always, and he never tried to compete for my attention. When I asked him about his own family, he said his parents had passed away years ago and he had no siblings. His work kept him busy and traveling, but he was ready to settle down, to build something real. He looked at me when he said it, and I believed him. As Christmas approached, Mark suggested we spend it together at my place. He offered to help with everything: decorating, cooking, shopping for presents. I agreed, feeling a warm excitement I hadn't experienced during the holidays in years. Christmas had always been special for Lily and me, our own little traditions and rituals. But having Mark there felt right. It felt like we were building something new together. He went all out with decorations, stringing lights around our small apartment, setting up a beautiful tree that nearly touched the ceiling. He played Christmas music while we baked cookies together. Lily laughed at his terrible singing voice. Everything felt magical and perfect in a way I had stopped believing was possible. On Christmas Eve, after Lily went to bed, Mark and I stayed up late wrapping presents and arranging them under the tree. He had bought gifts for both of us, but he was especially excited about Lily's main present. He told me he had been planning it for months, that it was something truly special for her collection, something that would show her how much he valued her passion. He made me promise not to peek, saying he wanted to see both of our reactions at the same time. I was touched by how much thought he had put into it. This was a man who truly cared about my daughter, who saw her brilliance and wanted to nurture it. I fell asleep that night, feeling more content than I had in years, wrapped in Mark's arms, believing I had finally found the happy ending we deserved. Christmas morning arrived bright and cold. I woke up early, unable to contain my excitement. Mark was already awake, brewing coffee in the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the apartment. He had prepared a whole Christmas breakfast spread. The rolls, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, orange juice. The tree lights twinkled in the early morning dim, and soft carols played from his phone speaker. Everything looked like a scene from a holiday movie. When Lily emerged from her room, still in her pajamas with her hair messy from sleep, her face lit up at the sight of all the presents. Mark had really gone overboard. There were wrapped boxes of all sizes, stockings stuffed full, and in the corner, one particularly large box wrapped in silver paper with a giant red bow. We ate breakfast together. Mark entertaining us with stories about Christmas celebrations he had witnessed in different countries. Lily was practically vibrating with anticipation, barely touching her food. I kept catching Mark's eye across the table, and he would smile at me with such warmth and affection. This was it. This was the family I had been dreaming of for so long. The happiness I felt was almost overwhelming. After breakfast, we moved to the living room to open presents. We took turns, savoring each gift, expressing genuine gratitude and excitement. Mark gave me a beautiful necklace with a small diamond pendant. Lily opened books, art supplies, and new collection boxes for her specimens. Everything was thoughtful and perfect. Finally, it was time for Lily's big present. Mark pulled the large silver box from the corner and placed it carefully in front of her. His excitement was palpable. He explained that this was something very special, something he had acquired specifically for her through a contact he had made during his travels. He told her to be very careful opening it, to move slowly and gently. Lily looked at me with wide eyes, and I nodded encouragingly. She began unwrapping the paper with meticulous care, peeling back each piece of tape. The box underneath was plain cardboard with ventilation holes punched in the sides. My heart was already starting to beat a little faster. Ventilation holes meant something living. Lily lifted the lid slowly. Inside was a truly beautiful custom-made glass terrarium. It was about the size of a shoebox, with a sealed lid and a miniature ecosystem inside. There was real soil, tiny plants, small pieces of bark, even a little water feature. It was a bioactive environment, the kind that serious keepers used for exotic species. The craftsmanship was incredible, but what caught everyone's attention was the occupant. In the center of the terrarium, resting on a carefully positioned piece of driftwood, was a spider unlike any I had ever seen. It was large, with a body about the size of a quarter, and its coloring was absolutely stunning. The spider's body and legs were a brilliant, iridescent cobalt blue that seemed to shimmer even in the soft Christmas morning light. It looked like something from a fantasy film, too beautiful to be real. Mark immediately launched into an explanation, his voice filled with pride. He told us it was a rare species from Southeast Asia, one that was seldom seen in captivity. He said he had acquired it from a specialized breeder friend who dealt in exotic arachnids, someone who ensured all specimens were ethically sourced and legal. He explained that despite its dramatic appearance, it was completely harmless, a docile species that made an excellent display animal. He said it would be the crown jewel of Lily's collection, something truly unique that reflected how special she was. He was practically glowing with pride at his gift. I looked at the spider, marveling at its beauty, and then turned to see Lily's reaction. I expected to see excitement, wonder. Instead, my daughter's face had gone completely white. All the color drained from Lily's cheeks. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her eyes were locked on the spider inside the terrarium, and her entire body had gone rigid. She wasn't blinking. She wasn't moving. The expression on her face wasn't disappointment or surprise. It was fear. Pure, undiluted, visceral fear. My stomach immediately dropped. Something was very wrong. Mark didn't seem to notice at first. He kept talking, pointing out features of the terrarium, discussing the care requirements, suggesting where she might want to display it in her room. I couldn't hear him anymore. All my attention was on my daughter, whose hands were now trembling slightly where they gripped the edges of the box. I moved quickly to kneel beside her. Placing my hand on her shoulder, she flinched at my touch, but didn't look away from the spider. I asked her what was wrong, keeping my voice gentle and calm, even though my heart was starting to race. Mark stopped talking, finally noticing that something was off. He asked if she didn't like it, if maybe she was just overwhelmed by such a big gift. Lily still didn't speak. She just stared at that brilliant blue spider. I could feel her shoulders shaking under my hand. Then, without taking her eyes off the terrarium, she reached over and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her small fingers digging into my skin. She leaned toward me, and in a voice barely above a whisper, so quiet that Mark couldn't possibly hear from where he sat across the room, she said the words that changed everything. She said, "That's not what he says it is." She said, "That's the wrong color blue." Her voice was shaking but certain. I pulled back to look at her face, confused and increasingly alarmed. Mark noticed our whispered exchange and asked again what was wrong. I turned to him, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what Lily had just told me. I asked him to explain again exactly what species it was, where he got it, how he knew it was safe. He repeated everything patiently with that same charming, easy confidence. He used a scientific name I didn't recognize. He assured me that his breeder friend was a professional, that all the documentation was in order, that he would never give Lily anything dangerous. He laughed a little, making a joke about how kids sometimes knew so much that they second-guessed even the experts. He suggested that maybe Lily was just surprised, that she needed a minute to process such an amazing gift. But I kept looking at my daughter, and she kept staring at that spider with absolute terror in her eyes. Mark stood up and moved closer, reaching for the terrarium. He said maybe they should take a closer look together, that Lily would feel better once she could examine it more closely. He suggested opening the terrarium so she could see more details, maybe even hold the spider if she felt brave. Every word he spoke made Lily's grip on my arm tighten. She was shaking her head now, tiny movements, still not making a sound. My protective instincts went into overdrive. I stood up, placing myself slightly between Mark and Lily. I said, maybe that wasn't a good idea right now, that Lily seemed overwhelmed and we should give her some space. Mark looked hurt, confused. He had spent so much money, so much effort, and his gift was being rejected. He tried again to reassure us, to convince us that everything was fine. Lily suddenly stood up, nearly knocking over the box containing the terrarium. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the kitchen, away from Mark and the spider. She looked back at me with pleading eyes. I told Mark to give us just a minute, that I needed to talk to Lily privately. He nodded, looking disappointed and bewildered, but he stayed in the living room. I let Lily pull me into the kitchen, and the moment we were out of his direct line of sight, she turned to me and started talking in a rapid, panicked whisper. Her words came out in a flood, tripping over each other in her urgency to make me understand. She told me that the spider looked almost exactly like a harmless species, one that lived in parts of Southeast Asia and was sometimes kept as a display animal. But the color was wrong. The shade of blue was too vibrant, too pure. The harmless species had a more muted, grayish-blue coloring. This spider's brilliant cobalt blue was the color of a different species, one that used mimicry to confuse predators and prey. She said it was a perfect example of Batesian mimicry, where a dangerous species evolves to look like a harmless one. She had just read about it in one of her journals last month. There was a whole article about color variations in Asian arachnids and how to tell the dangerous species from their harmless lookalikes. She told me the scientific name, something long and complicated with Latin roots. She said this species was one of the most venomous spiders in the world. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I stared at my 10-year-old daughter, seeing the absolute certainty in her eyes despite her fear. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't being dramatic. She knew. This was her passion, her expertise. She had spent 5 years studying these creatures with an intensity and dedication that most adults never applied to anything. She could identify species by minute details that I would never notice. I thought about all the times her knowledge had been dismissed by teachers, by other parents, by people who thought her hobby was weird or inappropriate. I thought about how often children's concerns are brushed aside by adults who think they know better. I looked at my daughter's terrified face and made my decision. I believed her, but believing her meant accepting something incomprehensible. It meant accepting that Mark, the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had been so kind and patient and wonderful for 6 months, had just given my daughter a deadly spider for Christmas. It made no sense. Why would he do that? Was it possible he had been scammed by this breeder friend that he genuinely didn't know? But even as I tried to rationalize it, my maternal instincts were screaming at me. Lily was in danger. We were both in danger. That spider was in our living room right now, in a sealed terrarium, but what if the seal wasn't perfect? What if it got out? I had to get us out of the house. I had to get Lily somewhere safe. But I couldn't let Mark know that anything was wrong. If I confronted him, if I accused him of giving us a dangerous spider, what would happen? I didn't know this man as well as I thought I did. I had no idea what he was capable of. My mind raced through possibilities. I needed an excuse to leave. Something believable, something that wouldn't make Mark suspicious. Lily was still staring at me, waiting for me to do something to fix this. I squeezed her hand and whispered that I believed her, that we were going to leave, that she needed to trust me and play along. Her eyes filled with tears of relief. I took a deep breath, forced every muscle in my face to relax, and plastered on a bright smile. We walked back into the living room together. Mark was sitting on the couch, looking at his phone. The terrarium was still on the floor where Lily had left it. That beautiful, deadly spider motionless inside. I announced with fake cheerfulness that I had just realized we were completely out of whipped cream for the hot chocolate. And it wouldn't be Christmas without proper hot chocolate. I said Lily and I needed to make a quick run to the corner store. Mark immediately offered to go himself, saying we should stay and enjoy Christmas morning. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I insisted, saying I needed a specific brand that only I would be able to find. And besides, Lily and I had a tradition of our Christmas morning store run. I was making it up as I went along, praying he would believe me. Lily stood next to me, silent and pale, but nodding along with my story. Mark looked between us, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Suspicion, calculation. Then his warm smile returned, and he said, "Of course. If it was a tradition, we should go." He said he would clean up the breakfast dishes while we were gone. I grabbed my purse and keys with hands that I hoped weren't shaking too visibly. I told Lily to get her coat and shoes. She moved like a robot, pulling on her winter jacket and shoving her feet into her boots without bothering to tie them. Mark walked us to the door, kissing me on the cheek and reminding us to drive carefully. I promised we would be back in 15 minutes. Lily and I walked out into the cold December morning, and it took every ounce of willpower I had not to run. We walked at a normal pace to my car parked on the street. I unlocked it, and we both climbed in. I started the engine, pulled away from the curb, and drove around the corner out of sight of our apartment building. Then I pulled over, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Lily burst into tears. The terror and stress she had been holding in came pouring out in great, gasping sobs. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached back to hold her, telling her she was so brave, so smart, that she had done everything right. She cried into my shoulder, her small body shaking. I was crying too, tears of fear and relief and overwhelming protectiveness. We were out, we were safe, but we weren't finished. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands. Lily lifted her head and told me again the scientific name of the spider, making me repeat it back to her to ensure I had it right. I typed it into the search engine, my heart in my throat. The results loaded, and my blood turned to ice. The first result was from a wildlife danger database. The spider's common name was the cobalt death weaver. It was native to remote regions of Southeast Asia and was considered one of the most dangerous spiders in the world. Its venom contained a neurotoxin that caused rapid paralysis, starting with the limbs and moving to the respiratory system. Victims typically had between 20 and 40 minutes before the paralysis reached their diaphragm and they stopped being able to breathe. The mortality rate without immediate medical intervention was over 70%. There was no widely available antivenom. Treatment involved life support and hoping the body could metabolize the toxin before permanent damage occurred. The spider was also noted for being unusually aggressive when disturbed, unlike many venomous species that preferred to flee. It would bite with minimal provocation. I kept reading, each sentence worse than the last. The species was illegal to own in virtually every country due to its danger level. It was on multiple endangered and protected lists. International trade of the species was banned under several wildlife protection treaties. The only specimens in captivity were in research facilities with specialized permits. Private ownership was not just illegal, but carried serious criminal penalties. Possession alone could result in federal charges. This wasn't just a dangerous pet. This was a serious crime, and it was sitting in my living room where Mark had put it, where he had intended my daughter to keep it in her room. I couldn't breathe. My mind was spinning out of control. This couldn't be an accident. No legitimate breeder would have this spider. No one could accidentally acquire something this dangerous. Mark knew. He had to know, but why would he do this? Was he trying to hurt us? But that made no sense. He had been so kind, so caring for months. Nothing about his behavior suggested he wanted to harm Lily or me. Unless everything had been a lie. Unless I had been completely fooled by a monster. I thought about him in my home right now, alone with that spider. What was he planning to do? Was he waiting for us to come back? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Lily had gone quiet in the back seat, her crying reduced to small hiccups. She asked me what we were going to do. I told her we were going to call the police. She nodded, looking tiny and scared in her winter coat. I dialed 911, and the call connected after 2 rings. The dispatcher answered with the standard greeting, asking about my emergency. I opened my mouth to explain and realized how insane this was going to sound. How did I explain that my boyfriend had given my daughter an illegal, deadly spider for Christmas? It sounded like a prank call. But I forced myself to speak, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I told the dispatcher that there was a dangerous, illegal animal in my home and that the person who brought it was still there. She asked what kind of animal. I told her it was a spider, a highly venomous species that was illegal to own. I could hear the skepticism in her voice when she asked if I was sure it was dangerous. I gave her the scientific name Lily had provided, spelling it out carefully. I told her to look it up, that it was one of the most venomous spiders in the world. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Then the dispatcher's tone changed completely. She asked if anyone had been bitten. I said no, that it was contained in a terrarium, but that we had left the house and the person who brought the spider was still inside. She asked for the address. I gave it to her. She told me to stay on the line and to remain where I was, that officers and animal control were being dispatched immediately. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. I sat in my car with Lily, both of us silent, listening to the dispatcher's occasional questions and updates. Police were en route. A specialized exotic animal control unit was being contacted. I was not to return to the apartment under any circumstances. I assured her we wouldn't. I kept watching the clock on my dashboard, thinking about Mark in our apartment. Did he know we weren't coming back? Had he figured out that something was wrong? What would he do? The dispatcher asked about Mark, his full name, description, whether I believed he was dangerous. I realized I didn't know the answer to that last question. I had thought I knew him. I had trusted him with my daughter. Now I had no idea who he really was. Finally, I saw the police cars. 3 of them, lights on but no sirens, speeding down the street toward our building. I told the dispatcher they had arrived. She instructed me to stay in my car until an officer came to speak with me. I watched from around the corner as the police parked in front of my building and officers got out. They moved quickly but carefully toward the entrance. A few minutes later, another vehicle arrived, a white van with an animal control logo. 2 people in specialized gear got out, carrying equipment I didn't recognize. They all entered my building together. I held Lily's hand over the seat back, neither of us speaking, barely breathing. We waited. I counted every second. At some point, neighbors started appearing in windows and doorways, drawn by the police presence. I felt sick thinking about what they must be imagining. What kind of Christmas morning emergency would bring 3 police cars to our building? After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, I saw movement at the building entrance. Officers emerged, and between 2 of them, handcuffed and looking nothing like the charming man who had kissed me goodbye 20 minutes earlier, was Mark. His face was hard, expressionless. He didn't struggle or protest. They put him in the back of one of the police cars. I couldn't look away, couldn't process what I was seeing. The man I had fallen in love with, the man I had trusted with my daughter, the man I had imagined building a future with. He was being arrested on Christmas morning. One of the officers started walking toward my car. I rolled down the window. He introduced himself and asked if I was the one who had called. I confirmed I was. He asked us to come with him, that they needed to take our statements, and that we definitely could not go back into the apartment yet. Lily and I got out of the car, and she immediately pressed herself against my side. The officer was kind, his voice gentle, as he explained they would need to talk to us separately. Another officer, a woman with a warm smile despite the circumstances, offered to sit with Lily while they spoke with me. My daughter looked up at me with frightened eyes, and I promised her it would be okay, that I would be right nearby. She nodded and let the female officer lead her to one of the police cars to wait. The first officer took me a little distance away and began asking questions. He wanted to know everything: how long I had known Mark, how he had come to give us the spider, what my daughter had said that made me suspicious. I told him everything, the words spilling out in a rush. I explained Lily's expertise, her immediate recognition that something was wrong. I told him about her whispered warning, about my decision to trust her knowledge over my boyfriend's assurances. The officer listened intently, taking notes. When I finished, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He said, "I should know that my daughter likely saved both our lives." He said, if we had tried to handle or move that spider, if Lily had taken it to her room as Mark intended, the outcome would have been very different. Then he told me what they had found. The spider was exactly what Lily had identified, a cobalt death weaver, confirmed by the animal control specialists. It was being transported in a secure container to a facility that could properly handle it. But that wasn't all. When they entered the apartment, Mark had been in the living room with the terrarium, but he had also had a phone and laptop out. Officers had secured both devices. With the probable cause from the illegal spider, they had been able to do a preliminary search. What they found was far worse than a single dangerous pet. Mark wasn't just a photographer. He was a trafficker. The officer explained that Mark was part of a large, sophisticated international network that smuggled exotic and endangered animals. His photography business was real, but served primarily as a cover, giving him reason to travel to remote locations and ship unusual items. He dealt in rare reptiles, birds, insects, and arachnids that were protected, endangered, or dangerous. His clients were wealthy collectors who didn't care about legality or ethics. The spider he had given Lily wasn't a gift. It was merchandise. He had needed to hide it temporarily during what the officer called a transaction interruption. Something had gone wrong with the deal, and Mark needed to keep the spider out of sight for a few days. He had used the gift as the perfect cover. No one would suspect that a Christmas present to a child was actually a piece of illegal contraband worth tens of thousands of dollars on the black market. I couldn't speak. I felt like I was going to be sick. The officer kept talking, explaining that they had found evidence of multiple shipments, communication with other traffickers, and financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in transactions. Mark had been under investigation for months, but they hadn't had enough evidence to make an arrest. Until now. Until he had been arrogant or desperate enough to hide a deadly spider in plain sight, gambling that a woman and her child wouldn't know the difference. He had been wrong. He had underestimated a 10-year-old girl and her encyclopedic knowledge of arachnids. The officer said we would need to give formal statements later, but for now, we were free to go. He said we couldn't return to our apartment for at least a few hours while they processed it as a crime scene. He gave me a card with case numbers and contact information. He told me that Lily would likely need to testify at some point, as her identification of the spider was crucial evidence. He thanked us for calling, for trusting her instincts, for doing everything right. Then he asked if there was somewhere safe we could go, family or friends who could take us in for the day. I nodded numbly. My sister lived across town. We could go there. The officer walked me back to Lily, who launched herself into my arms the moment she saw me. We held each other for a long moment. I drove us away from our building, from the police cars and the gathering crowd of neighbors, from the remnants of our perfect Christmas morning. Lily sat in the back seat, silent and small. I didn't know what to say to her. How did I explain that the man who had been so kind to her, who had encouraged her passion and bought her thoughtful gifts, had been using us the entire time? How did I tell her that his love had been a lie, a cover for something dark and criminal? How did I apologize for bringing someone so dangerous into her life? I had failed to protect her. I had been fooled completely. If it weren't for her knowledge, her intelligence, her courage to speak up, even when it meant contradicting an adult, we could both be dead right now. My 10-year-old daughter had saved us. I called my sister from the car, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked if we could come over. She immediately knew something was wrong and said, of course, to come right away. When we arrived at her house, she took one look at our faces and pulled us both inside. She made hot tea, wrapped us in blankets, and waited patiently for me to find the words to explain. When I told her everything, she looked horrified and heartbroken. She held Lily close and told her how brave and smart she was. She called Lily her hero. My daughter, who had been silent since we left our building, finally spoke. She asked if it was her fault, if Mark had done all those bad things because of her interest in bugs. I felt my heart break all over again. I knelt down in front of her and took her face in my hands. I told her that nothing about this was her fault. I told her that Mark was a criminal who had made his own choices, who had used and manipulated all of us. I told her that her knowledge, her passion, her brilliant mind had saved us both. I told her that she was the strongest, bravest person I knew. She started crying again, and I held her, rocking her like I did when she was small. My sister cried too, and the three of us sat together in her living room on Christmas morning, processing the nightmare our day had become. Afternoon, after Lily had finally fallen asleep on my sister's couch, exhausted from fear and tears, my sister and I talked quietly in the kitchen. She asked me how I was doing, and I didn't know how to answer. I felt numb, betrayed, angry, and terrified all at once. I had let that man into our lives. I had trusted him. I had imagined a future with him. Every kind word, every thoughtful gesture, every moment of connection had been a lie. He had looked at my vulnerable daughter and seen an opportunity, a tool to hide his crime. The thought made me physically ill. But beneath the horror and betrayal, there was something else. Pride. Overwhelming, fierce pride in my brilliant, weird, wonderful daughter, who had seen what I couldn't, who had trusted her knowledge even when it meant contradicting an adult, who had been brave enough to tell me the truth, even though she was terrified. That evening, Lily and I sat together at my sister's kitchen table. My sister had ordered pizza because none of us could stomach the idea of cooking. It was nothing like the Christmas dinner I had imagined. There was no roast, no fancy desserts, no twinkling tree or cheerful music, just pizza on paper plates at a borrowed table. But we were together, and we were safe. That was all that mattered. Lily was quiet, picking at her food. I asked her what she was thinking. She said she was thinking about all the other animals Mark had trafficked, wondering where they were now, if they were okay. Even after everything, her compassion and concern extended to creatures most people would never think twice about. That was my daughter. That was who she was, at her core. I told her that the police would find the other animals, that they would shut down the whole network. I told her that because of her, because she spoke up, they had finally caught Mark and could stop him from hurting any more animals or people. I told her that her knowledge had mattered in a way that most people's never would, that she had literally saved lives. She looked at me with red, tired eyes and asked if I was mad at her for liking bugs, because if she didn't, none of this would have happened. I felt tears burning in my eyes again. I told her I had never been more grateful for anything in my life than her unusual, wonderful, brilliant interest in entomology. I told her that her passion was a gift, that she was a gift, and that I would spend the rest of my life making sure she knew how extraordinary she was. The next few days were a blur of police statements, interviews, and slowly returning to some sense of normalcy. Our apartment was released back to us, but everything felt tainted. I couldn't look at the spot where the Christmas tree had stood without feeling sick. Mark's belongings were still there, and I called the police to ask if I could dispose of them. They said yes, that they had taken everything they needed. I threw it all away without looking at it, every gift he had given us, every photo, every reminder. I wanted him erased from our lives completely. Lily's microscope was the hardest. She loved it so much, but it came from him. bought with money from his crimes. I asked her what she wanted to do with it. She thought for a long time, then said she wanted to keep it. She said the microscope wasn't bad, that it was just a tool, and she could use it to do good things. I agreed, moved by her wisdom. The case against Mark grew stronger. The evidence from his devices revealed connections to trafficking rings across multiple continents. Other members of the network were arrested. Endangered animals were recovered and placed in sanctuaries. The prosecutors told us that Mark would likely spend decades in prison. They said Lily's identification of the spider and our quick thinking in calling the police had been the breakthrough they needed. At a later meeting, one of the investigators told Lily directly that she was a hero, that her expertise had accomplished what trained officers had been trying to do for months. She blushed and looked down, but I saw the smallest smile on her face. She was proud of herself, as she should be. School started again after winter break, and I worried about how Lily would handle it. She had always been on the outside, the weird bug girl that other kids didn't understand. But word had gotten around about what happened. Apparently, one of the investigating officers had a child at her school, and the story spread. Suddenly, her classmates looked at her differently. They asked her questions about spiders, about how she knew so much, about what happened. She was still quiet and reserved, but she wasn't invisible anymore. She was respected. Teachers treated her with a new level of seriousness. One of them asked if she would give a presentation to the class about arachnid identification and safety. She agreed, and I watched from the back of the classroom as my shy, brilliant daughter stood in front of her peers and taught them about her passion. They listened, actually listened, and asked genuine questions. It was a start. As for me, I struggled. I had trusted Mark completely, and that trust had nearly gotten my daughter killed. I felt guilty, stupid, and angry at myself. I went to therapy, trying to process the betrayal and trauma. My therapist helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Mark's actions, that manipulators and criminals are often skilled at deception, that my trust wasn't a weakness. She helped me see that the moment that mattered was when I had to choose between Mark's assurances and Lily's fear, and I had chosen right. I had believed my daughter. That was what counted. Slowly, very slowly, I started to forgive myself. Months later, on a warm spring day, Lily and I went to a nature preserve together. She brought her field guide and a collection jar, hoping to find specimens to observe and release. We walked the trails together, and I watched her examine plants and trees, looking for insects with practiced eyes. She found a beautiful beetle, iridescent green, and carefully captured it to observe. She looked at it through a magnifying glass, identified it, told me all about its habitat and behavior, then gently released it back to the leaf where she found it. She was so happy, so confident in her element. I took a picture of her, sunlight filtering through the trees, completely absorbed in her passion. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she asked me if I would ever date again. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it honestly before answering. I told her I didn't know, that maybe someday, but that I was in no hurry. I told her that she and I were a perfect team, just the two of us, and I didn't need anyone else to be happy. She smiled and hugged me tight. She said good, because she liked it being just us. I kissed her forehead and told her I loved her more than anything in the world. She said she loved me too, then added that if I ever did date again, she would do a background check. I really laughed for the first time since Christmas. I told her that sounded like an excellent plan. My daughter's niche knowledge, her weird hobby that other people had mocked and dismissed, had saved our lives. It had exposed a criminal network and protected countless endangered animals. It had proven that intelligence comes in many forms, that passion and expertise matter even in a child, and that listening to those we love can mean the difference between tragedy and survival. I thought about all the times I had defended her interest to skeptical teachers and judgmental parents. I had always believed in her, but now I had proof that she was exactly as remarkable as I always knew she was. The perfect Christmas I had dreamed of never happened. Instead, we got a nightmare that revealed the monster hiding behind a charming smile. But we survived. We saved each other. Lily saved us with her knowledge, and I saved us by trusting her. Our little family of two was stronger than ever, bound together by love, trust, and the unshakable knowledge that we could face anything as long as we had each other. That was the real gift that Christmas gave us, wrapped in terror and tied with truth. We learned what we were capable of. We learned what mattered. We learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is believe in the people you love, even when the world tells you otherwise. My 10-year-old daughter's encyclopedic knowledge of spiders saved our lives from the man I thought I loved. It's a chilling reminder that monsters often look like the perfect gift. Have you ever had a niche skill or a piece of knowledge get you out of a dangerous situation? Share your story in the comments below.